Ethan Cole, a police officer in Maple Creek, thought it was just another routine patrol, until he heard the shouting of a butcher chasing a wounded German shepherd through the snowy street. The man demanded $20 for the stolen meat or the animal's life. Ethan reached for his wallet without hesitation, but when he carried the scarred dog to the vet and saw the faded canine tag on its collar, his heart froze. This was Rex, the legendary police dog who had vanished 3 years ago in the crash that killed Sheriff Jacob Hayes. A crash everyone believed was an accident. Until now. What secrets had been buried, and why had Rex been forced into the shadows for so long? What happens next will make you cry and believe in miracles again. Before we start, tell me where you are watching from. Drop your country in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. Snowflakes drifted lazily over Maple Creek, Colorado that morning, clinging to the crooked rooftops and gathering in soft drifts along the edges of Main Street. The town, nestled in the foothills of the Rockies, carried a hush that winter mornings often brought. Chimneys breathed out plumes of wood smoke. Storekeepers shoveled their steps, and the distant whistle of a freight train echoed from the valley. Through the cold, steadying his breath, walked Officer Ethan Cole. At 35, he was a man who blended strength with restraint. His lean, broad-shouldered frame was built from years of patrols and hard work rather than vanity. He kept his brown hair cropped short, the gray at his temples showing earlier than his age. His gray eyes were calm, almost unreadable, the kind that could soften in kindness or turn steel hard when faced with injustice. Ethan wasn't the loudest voice in Maple Creek, but he was the sort of man people instinctively trusted. On this particular morning, his patrol was interrupted by a sharp shout. "Get back here, you mangy thief!" The voice was unmistakable. Frank Dalton, the town's butcher. Frank was a burly man in his late 40s, heavy-set with arms like hams from years of hauling carcasses and chopping meat. He wore a stained white apron that strained at the seams of his belly. His reputation matched his build, quick-tempered, proud of his trade, a man who believed order was kept best with a heavy hand. Ethan rounded the corner and saw Frank raising a thick wooden rod in his meaty fists. The target of his fury was a German shepherd crouched low in the snow. The animal was a sorry sight. His sable coat, once perhaps handsome, was now streaked with gray and dulled with dirt. One ear stood tall, the other bent halfway, giving him a lopsided look that made him seem both pitiful and dignified. Old scars crossed his hind leg, and fresh cuts marred his muzzle. His ribs jutted through his thin frame, yet in his eyes, amber, sharp, unyielding there, still glimmered a kind of strength. Clamped tight in his jaws was a strip of raw meat, stolen straight from Frank's counter. Even with his body shaking from cold and hunger, the shepherd growled low, protective, unwilling to give up the one prize that meant survival. "You'll pay for this!" Frank bellowed, stepping forward to strike. "Frank!" Ethan's voice cut through the chill. It was not shouted, but it carried weight. The butcher froze, the rod mid-air. He turned, red-faced, to Ethan. "Cole, you don't know what this mutt's been up to. Came in bold as brass, snatched it right from me. I can't have some beast like that running wild, frightening customers and stealing my stock. This town deserves better than stray dogs thinking they own the streets." Ethan's boots crunched in the snow as he stepped between man and animal. He glanced at the shepherd, who returned his stare with a wary growl, then back at Frank. "How much was the meat worth?" Frank grunted, his face still flushed with anger. $20. And if you want this mud off my back, you'll pay it. Otherwise, I'll finish what I started." Without hesitation, Ethan pulled his worn leather wallet from his coat. He counted out the bills with deliberate calm, holding them out. "Here, $20. Now drop the stick." Frank snatched the money, shoving it into his apron pocket. His glare shifted from the dog to Ethan. "Fine. But that beast is your responsibility now. Don't come running to me when it bites someone." With that, he stormed back into his shop, the door slamming shut behind him. The street fell quiet again, save for the soft whimper of the shepherd and the hiss of snow against the shop's windows. Ethan knelt slowly in the slush, his hand held out steady. "Easy, boy. No one's going to hurt you now." The dog's body trembled, every muscle tense, but his growl weakened to a shallow pant. His jaws loosened slightly around the meat, though he didn't let go. His amber eyes flicked from Ethan's hand to his face, searching, testing. Up close, Ethan could see the toll of hardship more clearly. The ragged scars, the frost on his whiskers, the gaunt lines along his ribs. But he also saw something else, a trace of discipline in the way the shepherd held himself, a dignity that hunger and pain hadn't stripped away. This was no ordinary stray. "Come on," Ethan murmured, his voice gentler now. "Let's get you warm." With patience, he slipped his arms beneath the dog's frail body. The shepherd flinched but did not resist. Ethan lifted him carefully, feeling the thinness beneath the thick fur, the weight of an animal who had once been powerful but was now reduced to survival. Even so, the dog's gaze never left him, sharp and unblinking, as though deciding whether this man was friend or foe. The warmth of Ethan's coat enveloped the animal as he carried him down the street. Snow crunched underfoot. Townsfolk peered from windows, some shaking their heads at the sight, but Ethan ignored them. He had no intention of leaving the shepherd to die in the snow. The little brass bell above the door of Whitmore Veterinary Care chimed softly as Ethan pushed inside. Warmth spilled over him from the wood stove in the corner. The smell of antiseptic mingled with the faint scent of hay and herbs. Behind the counter, Dr. Anna Whitmore looked up from her notes. She was a woman in her mid-40s with a frame both sturdy and graceful. Her brown hair, streaked with silver, was pinned neatly back, though a few strands framed her kind, weary face. Years of hardship, her husband's death in a mining accident, the long struggle of raising her daughter alone had etched quiet strength into her eyes. She was gentle with animals, but sharp when it came to people who showed cruelty. "Ethan?" she asked, startled by the sight of him cradling the battered dog. "What happened?" "Dalton's butcher shop," Ethan replied. "The dog tried to take some meat. Frank wanted to put him down. I paid him off, but—" He shifted the shepherd carefully in his arms. "He's in bad shape." Anna's eyes softened, though her lips pressed tight with disapproval at the thought of Frank raising a rod against a starving dog. She came around the counter, her hands quick and steady. "Set him here on the table. Let's see what we're dealing with." Ethan laid the shepherd gently down on the worn wooden surface. The dog shivered, but didn't fight. His chest rose and fell with labored breaths. His paws twitched slightly, as if ready to defend even in his weakness. Anna's eyes lingered on the dog, and a faint smile touched her lips despite the severity of his condition. "You always find the strays, Ethan," she murmured. He gave a faint shrug, his gaze fixed on the shepherd. "Someone has to." The stove crackled warmly. Snow whispered against the windows, and for the briefest moment, Maple Creek's ordinary winter morning faded away. Inside that small clinic, something had shifted. A scarred shepherd, a weary officer, and a woman who had long since stopped believing in new beginnings had found themselves together. And though none of them knew it yet, this meeting was the first turn in a path that would unravel secrets long buried in the snow. The wood stove in Anna Whitmore's clinic hissed softly, filling the small room with a comforting warmth as snow continued to fall outside. Ethan stood nearby, his gloves tucked into his belt, watching the battered German shepherd stretched across the examination table. The dog's breathing was shallow, his body stiff with both fear and fatigue. Ethan's steady gray eyes never left the animal, while Anna prepared her instruments with the practiced efficiency of a woman who had tended to countless creatures, though perhaps none as scarred as this one. Anna's presence had a calming gravity. She was in her mid-40s, sturdy but graceful, with streaks of silver threading her brown hair. Her face was marked by the kind of quiet strength born from grief and survival. Her husband's death in a mining accident years ago had left her cautious, but it had also given her a sharp sense of empathy for the wounded. Animals, like people, carried stories in their scars, and Anna had always believed those stories deserved to be heard. She stepped closer to the shepherd, who let out a weak growl. His eyes were sharp despite his weakness, amber glowing with suspicion. "Easy," Anna murmured, her voice steady, not sweet, but reassuring. She reached for a pair of scissors to trim away fur matted with blood. He's not just any stray, Ethan. This dog's seen training. You can tell by the way he doesn't flinch unless I cross a boundary. He knows rules." Ethan leaned against the wall, arms crossed, his brow furrowed. He had been in Maple Creek long enough to recognize stray dogs, and this one didn't move like any stray he'd ever seen. "I thought so too," he said quietly. "Something in his eyes?" Anna carefully cleaned the wounds, her hands sure and gentle. She dabbed antiseptic on the scratches, earning a growl that quickly melted into resignation, as if the shepherd understood he was being helped. She paused when she reached the left ear, bent awkwardly from an old injury. Running her fingers along the cartilage, she stopped. Her eyes widened. "Ethan," she whispered, brushing back the fur. Beneath the layers of hair, faint but unmistakable, was a series of small, deliberate markings burned into the skin, letters and numbers. She tilted the dog's ear toward the lamplight. "Look at this." Ethan stepped forward. The markings were scarred but legible enough. Canine Rex. For a long moment, the room seemed to still. Ethan's heartbeat thundered in his ears as he stared at the faint code. The name struck him like a blow. "This can't be," he muttered. Anna glanced at him. "You know this dog?" Ethan swallowed hard, his eyes locked on the shepherd who now panted softly under the lamplight. "Rex," he said. "He was part of the force, Sheriff Jacob Hayes' partner." The name alone carried weight in Maple Creek. Jacob Hayes had been the town's sheriff for nearly 2 decades. A man in his late 50s, Jacob had been tall, with a square jaw, steel blue eyes, and a voice that carried like a church bell. He was tough but fair, known for walking Main Street every morning to greet townsfolk by name. To Ethan, fresh out of the academy back then, Jacob had been more than a boss. He had been a mentor, almost a father. 3 years ago, Jacob's life had ended in what everyone called a tragic accident. His patrol car had crashed on the icy road just outside town. Flames had engulfed the wreck, leaving little behind. The official report said it was weather, misfortune, nothing more. Rex, the canine who had been with him, was listed as missing, presumed dead in the wreck. Ethan remembered the funeral, the folded flag, the silence that fell over Maple Creek. He remembered standing in the back, his fists clenched, feeling as if the ground had been pulled out from beneath him. Now, here was Rex, alive, scarred, half-starved, but alive. Ethan's throat tightened. He reached out slowly, letting his hand hover above the shepherd's head. "You're supposed to be gone," he murmured. The dog lifted his eyes, locking with Ethan's, and for a moment there was something like recognition. Anna tied off the last bandage and stepped back, watching Ethan with quiet curiosity. If this is Rex, then he's a survivor of something more than hunger, and if he belonged to Sheriff Hayes— Her words trailed off, but the implication lingered. Before Ethan could respond, the distant wail of a siren cut through the snowy silence outside. A patrol car rushing down Main Street. The sound jolted the shepherd. With a sudden burst of energy, he leapt from the table despite his injuries. His body crouched low, ears straining, eyes locked on the sound. He barked once, sharp and commanding, his chest vibrating with a force that filled the small room. Ethan and Anna froze. The reaction wasn't that of a stray, it was muscle memory, pure canine training. Rex had responded to the siren like a soldier hearing a bugle. Ethan's gray eyes widened, the final confirmation washing over him. "It's him," he whispered. "It has to be." The shepherd's bark faded, his body sagging again with exhaustion. He lay down near the stove, still alert but panting heavily, his eyes never leaving Ethan. The moment felt sacred somehow, as though a piece of the past had clawed its way back through time. Ethan's mind raced. If Rex had survived, what had really happened that night? Could Jacob's death have been more than just an accident? For 3 years he had carried the ache of unanswered questions, burying them beneath his duty. Now, with Rex before him, those questions surged to the surface like cracks splitting through ice. Anna broke the silence gently. "If you're right, Ethan, then this dog is more than just a stray. He's a witness, a survivor." Ethan nodded, his jaw tight. Memories of Jacob's voice, steady and wise, filled his thoughts. Jacob had once told him, "Justice isn't about what's easy, son. It's about what you can't walk away from." Ethan realized now that he couldn't walk away from Rex, not from this mystery, not from the truth buried in snow and silence. He crouched beside the shepherd, resting a hand lightly on the dog's scarred head. "We'll find out what happened," he said quietly. "You and me, Rex. We'll finish what Jacob started." The stove crackled. Snow fell beyond the frosted window. Inside the clinic, Ethan Cole, Dr. Anna Whitmore, and the scarred K9 sat bound together by the weight of the past and by the promise of uncovering what had been hidden too long. The snow had thinned by the following morning, leaving Maple Creek slick with slush and lined with hard ridges of ice along the roads. The police station, a squat brick building on Main Street with frosted windows and a flag stiff in the cold wind, stood as the town's quiet sentinel. Inside, the hallways hummed with the low murmur of officers trading reports, the shuffle of boots, and the faint ring of telephones. Officer Ethan Cole pushed through the glass doors, the German shepherd padding at his side. The dog, now cleaned and bandaged thanks to Anna's care, looked steadier, though his ribs still showed beneath the sable and silver coat. His bent ear gave him a permanent air of ruggedness, but his amber eyes burned sharp, scanning the station as if old instincts had awoken in full force. The brass tag on his neck read faintly K9 Rex, and for Ethan, the sight of it was both grounding and haunting. Inside, behind a broad oak desk, sat Sheriff Ronald Briggs, the man who had taken over after Jacob Hayes's death. Briggs was in his early 50s, stocky and weathered, with thinning gray hair combed back and deep creases in his face that made him look perpetually tired. He wore his uniform pressed but strained, the buttons pulled taut across his belly. He had been a deputy during Jacob's time, but had never carried the same charisma or respect. Briggs was pragmatic, a man of procedures and shortcuts, and many in town whispered that his ambition outweighed his courage. Ethan approached, his expression steady, but his pulse quickened. "Sheriff, I need access to the Hayes case file, the patrol car accident from 3 years ago." Briggs raised a brow, his eyes flicking to Rex before returning to Ethan. "That case is closed, Cole. Weather caused the crash. You know that as well as I do." "With respect, sir," Ethan said carefully, "there are details that don't sit right. And Rex," he gestured to the shepherd, who now sat beside him like a disciplined soldier, "he survived. That means we might have overlooked something." Briggs sighed heavily, leaning back in his chair. "Cole, I don't have the manpower or patience to stir up old wounds. Hayes was a good man, but accidents happen. Chasing ghosts won't bring him back, and dragging this town through rumors again won't help anyone." The words struck Ethan like cold steel. He clenched his jaw, his fingers curling against his thigh. Still, he forced calm into his tone. "Then let me look myself. One night in the records room. No disruption, no cost to the department." But Briggs shook his head firmly. "Denied. End of discussion." His eyes hardened. The conversation closed as he turned back to his paperwork. Ethan felt a wave of frustration but said nothing. He gave a short nod, turned on his heel, and led Rex down the corridor. The shepherd's nails clicked on the floor, his head swinging as though he understood the tension in the air. The records room lay in the back of the building, past the humming boiler and beneath the flickering fluorescent light that buzzed like an insect. Ethan slipped inside, the old smell of dust, paper, and ink washing over him. Stacks of cardboard boxes lined the shelves, labeled in fading marker. He found the box marked Hayes Incident Reports 2019 and pulled it free, setting it on the table. He opened the first folder. Reports stacked neatly, witness statements, weather conditions, photographs. Too neat, Ethan thought. Something felt stripped bare. He scanned quickly, then pulled his phone from his pocket. Glancing at the door, he began snapping photos of the pages, the faint click of the camera app echoing in the silence. Rex paced near the corner of the room, sniffing the air. His nose brushed against a smaller box shoved half-hidden under a shelf. He whined low, then pawed at it, the claws scratching cardboard. Ethan frowned and pulled the box free. It was marked Vehicle Evidence. When he lifted the lid, the air filled with the faint metallic tang of oil and burned rubber. Inside lay fragments from the wreck, twisted metal, a melted radio, charred cloth. Rex buried his nose into the box, then stiffened, a low growl rumbling from his chest. He sniffed again at one jagged piece of metal, then pulled back, sneezing violently, whining in agitation. Ethan leaned closer. The shard was darkened, but along its edge was a sticky residue that smelled not only of gasoline but of something sharper, chemical accelerant. Ethan's heart pounded. He pressed a cloth over the piece, lifting it carefully. "You smell it too, don't you, boy?" Rex's eyes blazed as he barked once, sharp and low, his hackles raised. That bark wasn't random. It was a signal, an alert. The door creaked suddenly. Ethan snapped the lid back onto the box, heart thundering. Standing in the doorway was Deputy Lila Monroe. Lila was 28, with auburn hair tied back into a practical ponytail and eyes the shade of green glass. Athletic and tall, she carried herself with confidence, though a trace of warmth lingered in her smirk. She had joined the force fresh from the academy only 2 years earlier, and while many dismissed her for her youth, Ethan had seen her sharp instincts firsthand. She was witty, loyal, and often braver than protocol allowed. "You really shouldn't be in here," she said lightly, closing the door behind her. Her gaze flicked to Rex, then back to Ethan. "But something tells me you don't care." Ethan straightened. "Briggs won't reopen the file, but Rex, he's alive, and something doesn't add up." Lila's smirk softened into seriousness. She stepped closer, pulling a slim envelope from under her jacket. "I figured you'd come here. I made copies of some reports I wasn't supposed to see. Pages were missing in the official file. Lab results, mostly." She placed the envelope on the table. "They tested for accelerants. The results weren't included in the final report." Ethan's eyes met hers, gratitude mingling with the heavy weight of realization. He took the envelope, slipping it into his jacket. "Thank you." Rex whined softly, still circling the evidence box, his body taut, as if guarding the very truth itself. Lila crouched, extending a hand toward him. Rex sniffed, then allowed her to brush her fingers along his head. "He's got the eyes of a soldier," she murmured. Ethan exhaled slowly, the weight of the moment pressing against him. "This isn't over, not by a long shot." The records room was silent again, save for the low hum of the fluorescent light and the steady breathing of the shepherd who had carried the past back into the present. The docks of Maple Creek were not the kind of place people lingered after dark. By day, they bustled with shipments of lumber and crates hauled from the Valley Railroad. But when the sun dipped behind the mountains, the warehouses cast long shadows, and whispers carried further than footsteps. That night, the air smelled of oil and rust, the river lapping faintly against frozen pylons. Officer Ethan Cole walked the narrow boardwalk with Rex close at his side. The German shepherd's paws clicked softly against the damp planks, his lean frame tense, ears twitching at every sound. His amber eyes swept the darkness as though searching for enemies long remembered. Ethan wore a thick coat against the cold, but his thoughts were elsewhere, fixed on the case files he had photographed, the missing lab reports Lila had slipped him, and the accelerating certainty that Jacob Hayes's death had never been an accident. As the snow thinned above, voices drifted from deeper within the dockyard. Harsh, guttural, laughing voices. Ethan slowed, pulling Rex closer to the shadows. Ahead, a cluster of men gathered near the open door of a warehouse. At their center stood Vincent Morelli. Morelli was in his early 40s, tall and lean but wiry. His black hair slicked back with oil, his dark coat hanging heavy across his shoulders. His face bore sharp angles, his nose crooked from an old break, his eyes restless and hard. He had built his reputation in the underbelly of Maple Creek through smuggling, intimidation, and control. The kind of man who smiled with his mouth, but not with his eyes. Years ago, he had clashed with Sheriff Jacob Hayes, who had threatened to bring his operation down. The hatred between them had never been subtle. Morelli lit a cigarette, the glow flaring briefly in the dark. He spoke low, his voice smooth but edged like a blade. "Business is clean. No mistakes this time. The sheriff isn't here to sniff around anymore." Laughter followed from his men. At those words, Rex stiffened. A deep growl rumbled from his throat, low but dangerous. Ethan placed a steadying hand on his back, but the shepherd's body was taut as a bowstring. His bent ear twitched, his hackles bristling. They pressed closer into the shadows, but Ethan's attention was drawn to a smaller figure huddled near the edge of the group. It was a boy, no older than 12, crouched beside a crate. His blond hair was unkempt, sticking out under a threadbare cap. His coat was too big for his skinny frame, sleeves rolled up at the wrists, and his jeans were torn at the knees. His shoes looked worn to the sole. The boy's face was pale, his eyes wide and restless, darting nervously as though he wanted to be anywhere but there. This was Tommy, a street orphan who had drifted into the company of the wrong men. Ethan recognized the type, children who clung to gangs for scraps of food and a place to belong, but who never truly belonged. Tommy's thin hands clutched the crate as if it were his anchor in the storm. As Morelli spoke, Tommy's gaze drifted outward and landed on Rex. His eyes widened in recognition. Slowly, his mouth fell open, almost in disbelief. He knew this dog. Rex's growl deepened. His body crouched low, eyes fixed on Morelli with something between fury and fear. The sound vibrated through his chest like thunder rolling in the distance. Ethan could feel the energy radiating from him. This was no ordinary reaction. This was memory. Tommy stood suddenly, stepping back from the crate. "That's him," he whispered hoarsely, his voice cracking. "That's the dog from the warehouse." His words carried across the group like a spark on dry tinder. Morelli turned sharply, his dark eyes narrowing. "What did you say, boy?" Tommy stammered, his body trembling. I saw him before, in the old warehouse. He was with us. You—" The boy bit down on his words, terrified. Rex barked suddenly, sharp and fierce, the sound splitting the night. It was not the bark of a stray, but the authoritative command of a trained canine. Morelli flinched, his cigarette tumbling to the ground. For an instant, a flicker of unease crossed his face, as though he too recognized something in the shepherd's stance, in the memory of a dog once trained to hunt him. Ethan grabbed Tommy by the arm, pulling him back into the shadows. The boy struggled, startled, but then froze when he saw Ethan's badge glint faintly in the lamplight. "You're safe," Ethan whispered firmly. "Stay quiet." Tommy stared at him, then at Rex, whose body trembled with the force of restrained rage. "They had him," Tommy whispered, tears welling in his eyes. "They made him guard the doors. I swear I saw them hurt him when he didn't obey." His words tumbled out in desperation, a child's confession seeking absolution. Ethan's chest tightened. So it was true. Rex had been stolen, twisted into a tool for criminals, and then discarded when his strength waned. The pieces of the puzzle sharpened into something darker. Morelli barked orders to his men, scanning the shadows. "Find out who's here." Ethan pulled Tommy close, retreating silently with Rex at his heel. The shepherd turned his head once more toward Morelli, a guttural snarl vibrating through him, eyes blazing with hatred born of memory. Ethan had never seen such raw emotion in an animal before. It was as though Rex carried the scars of every cruel hand, every shouted command, and every betrayal. They slipped into the narrow alley behind the warehouses. Tommy clung to Ethan's sleeve, his voice trembling. "You don't understand. Rex isn't just a dog to them. He was their guard, their tool. But he didn't want it. I saw it. He was loyal to someone else. He was loyal to you." Ethan placed a firm hand on the boy's shoulder. "You did good telling me this. Now, you stay out of sight. I'll handle the rest." The boy nodded weakly, his thin frame shivering in the cold, but his eyes clung to Rex as though the dog's presence itself was a promise that monsters could be beaten. Ethan crouched beside Rex, meeting the shepherd's eyes. "You remember him, don't you? Morelli." The dog growled again, a sound that seemed to echo from a place deep within his bones. Ethan's own jaw tightened. The path forward was clearer now, even if more dangerous. Together, man and dog stepped back into the night, their breath rising in mist, carrying with them the echoes of streets haunted by crime, memory, and vengeance. The morning after the encounter at the docks broke cold and brittle, the sky pale gray, the air sharp with frost. Ethan Cole walked across the quiet residential edge of Maple Creek, Rex at his side. The shepherd's gait was steadier now, though his ribs still showed, and the old scar on his hind leg made him limp slightly with each step. Yet his eyes were clear, alert, and alive. They were on their way to find Tommy, the boy who had blurted out the truth about Rex in front of Morelli's men, and who might hold the missing pieces Ethan needed. Ethan found him near the derelict bus stop at the end of Mill Street. The stop was little more than a rusted metal bench and a warped shelter whose glass panes had long since been shattered. Tommy sat there with his knees drawn up to his chest, arms wrapped around them, shivering in the cold. His blond hair was messy, sticking out from beneath a frayed cap, and his face, though young, already bore the hardness of someone who had seen too much too early. When he saw Ethan approach, the boy tensed, his eyes darting between the officer and the shepherd. But it was Rex who walked ahead first, his amber eyes fixed gently on the boy. The growls and tension from last night were gone. In their place was a quiet curiosity. Rex stopped just before Tommy, tilted his head, and let out a soft whine. Ethan crouched to the boy's level. "Tommy, I'm not here to scare you. I just want to talk." His voice was calm, steady, the same tone he used to calm frightened witnesses. Tommy hesitated, glancing at Rex again. When the shepherd stepped closer and nuzzled his cold hand, something in the boy broke. His thin shoulders shook, and he whispered, "I knew it. He's the same dog. They called him Rex." Ethan gave a short nod. "Tell me what you know." At first, the boy resisted, biting his lip, shaking his head, but Ethan didn't push. Instead, he sat quietly beside him on the cold bench, Rex resting his head on the boy's lap. After a long silence, Tommy's words began to spill out. "They took him after the crash," Tommy said in a voice that trembled. "I don't know how, but I remember Morelli's men dragging him into the warehouse. He fought them, but they hurt him until he stopped fighting. They made him guard their shipments, mostly drugs. They trained him with beatings, made him bark when strangers came near, made him drag crates with chains strapped to him." Tears stung his eyes as he looked down at Rex. But he never liked it. I could tell. Sometimes, when no one was watching, he'd just sit and stare at the door like he was waiting for someone who never came. Ethan's jaw tightened. The image clawed at him, the loyal K-9, once Sheriff Hayes' partner, forced into service for the very man who may have orchestrated Jacob's death. Tommy sniffed hard, his voice cracking. When he got older, when he limped too much, they stopped feeding him. Said he wasn't worth it. One night I saw them kick him out, said to let the streets finish him. I thought he was gone forever. His hand stroked Rex's fur, and for the first time the shepherd leaned into the touch, pressing his scarred head against the boy's chest. Ethan placed a firm but gentle hand on Tommy's shoulder. "You did right telling me this, but you can't stay on the streets. Morelli will use you until you're no good to him either." Tommy flinched at that truth. His greenish-blue eyes darted away, but Ethan continued. "Do you have anyone? Family?" "My grandma," Tommy whispered after a long pause. "She lives out on Willow Lane. But she's sick. She told me she couldn't feed me anymore. That's why I—" His voice trailed off. Ethan stood, offering his hand. "Then let's go see her. You shouldn't be alone out here." Together, they made the walk through the icy streets to a weather-beaten little house on the edge of town. The porch sagged, and smoke barely trickled from the chimney. Inside, they found Margaret Maggie Turner, Tommy's grandmother, a frail woman in her 70s with snow-white hair pulled back in a bun and a face lined by hardship but softened by kind eyes. She wore a faded cardigan and leaned heavily on a cane as she opened the door. "Tommy?" she gasped, pulling her grandson into her arms. Her body was thin, fragile, but her embrace was fierce. She turned to Ethan, eyes brimming with both fear and gratitude. "Officer Cole, I told him I couldn't take care of him. I thought—" Her voice broke. "You don't have to do it alone," Ethan said firmly. "I'll see to it he's safe. And this dog—" He gestured toward Rex, who sat nobly beside the boy. "He's part of it, too." Maggie's gaze softened at Rex. "A guardian, then," she whispered. The evening passed with warmth returning to the small home. Ethan fetched firewood, stoking the stove until the room was alive with heat. Maggie brewed tea, her hands shaking but her spirit steadier with her grandson home again. Tommy, for the first time in months, slept on a mattress rather than concrete, curled up beneath a quilt. Rex lay at the foot of the bed, watchful, his head resting on his paws. Later, as Ethan sat with Maggie at the table, she spoke in a low voice. "He's a good boy, my Tommy. He just needed someone to believe in him again." She looked toward the dog. "Seems he's found a friend in that shepherd." Ethan's eyes softened. Not just a friend. Rex was once a partner to Sheriff Hayes. He was stolen, broken, used by the men who killed him. But he's still loyal, still brave. Maggie nodded slowly, her wrinkled hands gripping the edge of her mug. Sometimes the strongest hearts are the ones most scarred. From the bed, Tommy stirred, one hand reaching out in his sleep to rest on Rex's fur. The shepherd did not move away. Instead, he shifted closer, his breathing calm and steady, as though he had at last found a place to guard where he was wanted. For Ethan, the sight etched itself deeply. Rex, though battered by cruelty, still knew loyalty when he felt it, and Tommy, hardened by the streets, was softening again under that loyalty. Together, they were proof that even after betrayal and loss, the heart could still choose love. The night air along Maple Creek's industrial district carried the tang of iron and gasoline. The warehouses, looming like silent giants, stood in crooked rows by the railway line. Their corrugated walls reflected dim strips of moonlight, and from somewhere deep inside, the faint murmur of voices leaked into the quiet. Ethan Cole crouched in the shadow of a shipping container, his breath clouding in the cold. Rex pressed close to his leg. The German shepherd was alert, nose twitching, amber eyes alive with focus. The old scar along his hind leg glinted faintly under the pale light, but the wound didn't hinder his sharp movements. His bent ear twitched whenever sound carried across the yard. Despite the years of abuse, Rex moved like a professional, like the canine he once was. A soft whisper broke the silence. Deputy Lila Monroe knelt beside Ethan, pulling a small black case from her jacket. Lila's auburn ponytail brushed against her shoulder as she worked, green eyes flicking between Ethan and the warehouse door. At 28, she had already built a reputation for her sharp wit and unwillingness to back down. Her frame was athletic, her posture confident. She clicked open the case, revealing a set of listening devices. "We'll plant it under the office window," she murmured. "They hold their meetings there." Ethan nodded, his gray eyes steady. Quick and quiet. They moved together, Rex padding low and silent, his paws barely making a sound on the frozen ground. Lila pressed the bug beneath the sill, her hands practiced. From inside came Morelli's gravelly voice, carried clear once the device linked with the receiver. Vincent Morelli's tone was smug, dripping with self-satisfaction. "Jacob Hayes thought he could clean this town. I made sure he never got the chance. 3 years ago, one slick patch of road, one well-timed charge, and his car lit up like a bonfire." His men laughed harshly in response. "The town called it an accident, but we know better. He was in my way, and I don't tolerate obstacles." Ethan's stomach clenched. Hearing Morelli boast about orchestrating the death of Sheriff Hayes, his mentor, his father figure, was like swallowing glass. He exchanged a quick glance with Lila, whose jaw tightened, fury flashing in her green eyes. Inside, Morelli continued, "And now the dog. That mutt should have died in the fire. Instead, I had him dragged here, broken in, made him guard my product. But time catches up. The beast got old, and I let the streets deal with him. Funny, ain't it? The sheriff and his canine both ended by my hand." Rex's body trembled, a growl building low in his chest, his hackles bristling. Ethan pressed a calming hand against him, though his own rage nearly matched the shepherd's. A sudden noise pulled Rex's attention. He turned his head toward a row of crates stacked near the dock. Sniffing the air, he padded over and shoved his nose against one of the wooden slats. His growl deepened. Ethan followed, prying open the lid. Inside, beneath tarps and sacks, lay canisters of industrial chemicals blackened at the rims, faintly charred. The smell hit him instantly. Acrid, bitter, unmistakable. Explosives. Ethan froze. The residue smelled identical to the fragment Rex had uncovered in the file room evidence box. He knelt, holding one canister closer to the light. "It's the same compound," he whispered. "The same accelerant they used on Jacob's car." Rex barked once, sharp and definitive, his nose pressing insistently against the canister. The signal was clear. Confirmation. Before Ethan could say more, the faint crunch of footsteps behind startled them both. A flashlight beam swept dangerously close. He and Lila ducked into the shadows, hearts pounding. Two of Morelli's men strolled past, laughing, unaware how close they were to exposing themselves. When the footsteps faded, Ethan turned to Lila, his face pale but determined. "This is proof. He admitted it, and now we have the chemical. We're close." Lila tucked the receiver back into her jacket. "Close is dangerous," she whispered. "One wrong move and Briggs will bury this before it ever sees daylight." Later, back at the veterinary clinic, Ethan sat across from Anna Whitmore. The small room smelled of antiseptic and tea, a fire burning low in the stove. Anna's tired but kind eyes studied him as he explained what they had overheard. She was in her 40s, her face lined with years of hardship but softened by empathy. Her hands, folded around a steaming mug, trembled slightly as she listened. "You can't keep pushing this, Ethan," she said quietly. "Morelli has power, men, and influence. If he knows you're digging, he won't hesitate to kill you, or Rex." Ethan's gaze drifted to the shepherd lying on the rug. Rex lifted his head, amber eyes steady, scars gleaming faintly. He looked every bit the soldier he once was, even in rest. Ethan's throat tightened. "Jacob deserves justice," Ethan said firmly, his voice low but unshaken. "I can't let his death be buried under lies. Not when Rex survived. Not when the truth is right there." Anna's lips pressed into a thin line. She reached out, laying her hand briefly over his. "Just be careful. I lost someone once. I don't want to see this town lose you too." Ethan met her eyes, gratitude flickering through his weariness. "I'll be careful, but I won't stop." In the silence that followed, Rex stretched, pressing his scarred muzzle against Ethan's hand. The shepherd's body was calm now, no longer trembling with anger, but his presence radiated loyalty. He was more than a survivor. He was a witness, a partner, and perhaps the only bridge between the past and justice. Outside, the wind howled across Maple Creek, rattling the eaves. Inside, Ethan knew the trap had been sprung. Morelli had confessed, Rex had found the proof, and the path to truth, though dangerous, was clearer than ever. The night of the raid fell heavy over Maple Creek, the sky moonless and clouded, the air thick with the scent of diesel and smoke. The warehouse district was alive with shadows, its skeletal structures creaking under the weight of the cold wind that blew off the river. Every light seemed a threat, every echo of a footstep a warning. Ethan Cole adjusted the strap of his tactical vest, his gray eyes fixed ahead. Beside him, Rex sat alert, chest rising and falling with steady breaths, the scarred shepherd seemingly aware that tonight would test every ounce of strength left in him. The FBI had sent a small team under the command of Agent Daniel Carter, a man in his mid-40s with close-cropped black hair already graying at the temples. His build was compact but strong, and his calm, precise demeanor spoke of years spent in high-risk operations. His steel blue eyes were unreadable, but his respect for Ethan was clear in the way he listened when Ethan laid out the plan. Carter was no stranger to men like Vincent Morelli criminals who thrived on fear and intimidation. But he knew this operation had to be flawless. Deputy Lila Monroe stood near Ethan, her auburn ponytail tucked under her cap, her green eyes sharp and alive in the glow of the dim security lights. Her frame was tense with focus, though her jaw carried the trace of a grin that betrayed her nerves. "We only get one shot at this," she murmured, her voice low but steady. Ethan gave a short nod, his tone quiet but firm. "We hit him before he leaves town. He knows the noose is tightening. Tonight, he runs." Inside the warehouse, Morelli's operation was already in motion. Trucks rumbled, crates were hauled, and armed men barked orders. Morelli himself stood at the center of it all, his lean figure draped in a dark coat, cigarette glowing faintly between his fingers. His sharp features were tense, his slicked-back hair damp with sweat. The arrogance from nights before was gone, replaced by a coiled desperation. On the rooftops, FBI snipers moved into position. In the shadows, agents readied their weapons. Ethan crouched with Lila and Rex waiting for Carter's signal. The shepherd's ears pricked at every sound, his muscles coiled, ready to spring. The quiet was broken not by Carter's radio, but by a breathless voice from the dark. "They're coming from behind!" Ethan spun to see Tommy, the boy with the threadbare cap, darting toward them from the far alley. His thin frame shook with fear, but his voice carried with conviction. "I saw them! Morelli's men! They're circling to hit you from the back!" For a split second, Ethan's heart clenched at the sight of the boy in the line of fire. "Tommy, get down!" he ordered, pulling him behind cover. Lila's eyes widened, then softened, a flicker of admiration passing over her face. "Kid's got guts," she muttered. Agent Carter didn't waste a second. He redirected 2 agents to cover the rear. "Move now," he commanded, his voice clipped and precise. "They won't flank us tonight." With the surprise foiled, Carter gave the signal. The strike team surged forward. The warehouse erupted in chaos. Flashbangs exploded, filling the night with blinding light and deafening sound. FBI agents stormed the entrance, weapons raised, shouting commands. Morelli's men scrambled, firing wild shots that ricocheted against steel beams. Crates splintered, and the smell of gunpowder filled the air. Ethan moved with practiced precision, Rex bounding ahead, barking fiercely, his presence as commanding as any armed agent. Lila covered their flank, her aim steady, firing controlled bursts to suppress the enemy. In the middle of the chaos, Morelli bolted for the back exit. His dark coat flared as he shoved past his own men, pistol drawn, desperation twisting his face. Ethan saw him break away and gave chase. Rex surged forward, the years seeming to melt from his body as training and instinct overtook age and scars. His muscles strained, but his focus was unwavering. Morelli raised his pistol, aiming back at Ethan. The shepherd launched. His teeth clamped down on Morelli's arm with brutal force, wrenching the weapon aside. Morelli screamed, stumbling, the gun clattering to the concrete. Ethan closed the distance in seconds, tackling the mob boss to the ground. The struggle was short-lived. Morelli was no match for a man driven by justice and a dog driven by loyalty. Cuffs clicked shut around his wrists, his curses muffled by the roar of the ongoing raid. But Rex did not move immediately. He remained planted before Ethan, teeth bared, his body shaking with the effort of holding himself upright, his amber eyes locked on Morelli, unyielding. Even as exhaustion weighed heavy, the shepherd stood between his handler and danger, a wall of muscle and willpower. "Easy, boy," Ethan said softly, resting a hand on Rex's scarred head. "It's done. He's finished." Around them, FBI agents secured the scene. Lila approached, pulling her cap back, her chest heaving. She glanced at Rex and shook her head in awe. "That dog just saved your life, saved all of us." Agent Carter stepped forward, his voice measured but carrying respect. "You've got yourself one hell of a partner, Cole, and we've got Morelli. That's a win." Tommy peeked from behind the crates where Ethan had shoved him. His young face was pale, eyes wide, but there was a light of pride burning there. "He did it," the boy whispered. "Rex really did it." The night wind howled through the broken warehouse windows, carrying with it the echo of shouts and sirens. Morelli sat shackled on the cold floor, his empire collapsing around him. Ethan knelt by Rex, whose body trembled from the strain but whose eyes gleamed with the same loyalty that had carried him through fire, betrayal, and pain. For Ethan, it was more than a victory. It was justice for Jacob Hayes, for Rex, and for a town that had long lived in the shadow of corruption. The trial of Vincent Morelli became the most talked-about event Maple Creek had seen in decades. The courtroom, with its high wooden rafters and tall windows filtering pale winter light, was packed each day with townsfolk who had once whispered about Morelli's power, but now came to watch his downfall. The FBI's evidence was airtight: the listening device recordings, the explosives residue, and the testimony of Ethan Cole. The final blow came when Rex was led into the courtroom, his scarred body and bent ear a living reminder of Morelli's cruelty. The jury needed only hours to deliver the verdict guilty on all counts. The revelation that Sheriff Jacob Hayes' death had been murder, not accident, struck Maple Creek like thunder. Jacob's name was restored, and the man who had betrayed the town with fear was stripped of power. For Ethan, it felt like lifting a stone he had carried for 3 years. His gray eyes, usually guarded, softened when the judge declared Morelli sentenced to life. For a moment, he thought of Jacob's voice, steady and sure, telling him that justice might come slow, but it always came. In the weeks that followed, Ethan found himself hailed as a hero. Neighbors who once greeted him with polite nods now stopped him in the street to shake his hand. The mayor offered him a commendation, and the local paper printed his photograph alongside Rex's, calling them the duo who brought truth back to Maple Creek. Ethan accepted it all with humility, his thoughts always turning back to Jacob and to the shepherd who had survived against all odds. The department made an official announcement. Rex was to be reinstated as a K-9 officer of honor. His name once again entered into the records as Jacob Hayes' loyal partner and now Ethan's. At the small ceremony outside the police station, Rex stood proudly beside Ethan, wearing a new collar polished with a brass plate that read K-9 Rex, Loyal Guardian. His amber eyes still gleamed, and for that moment he looked every bit the soldier he had always been. Time, however, does not slow even for heroes. A year passed. Seasons rolled across Maple Creek, the thaw of spring, the green of summer, the burnished gold of autumn. Tommy grew taller, his once thin frame filling with the strength of adolescence. His blond hair now brushed his collar, and his blue eyes, once shadowed with fear, carried new determination. Ethan often found him at the station, volunteering to sweep floors, ask questions, and study patrol reports. One evening, as snow began to fall again, Tommy stood before Ethan and said with a steady voice, "I'm going to the academy one day. I want to serve like you and like Jacob." Ethan's heart swelled with quiet pride. Dr. Anna Whitmore, too, changed in subtle ways. She still wore her hair pulled back in neat pins, but her smile came easier now. She had stood by Ethan through the investigation, through the trial, and through the quieter days after. She teased him gently when he forgot to eat, scolded him when he pushed himself too hard, but her eyes always carried warmth. She loved Rex in her own way, too, often stopping by to check on his health, slipping him extra biscuits though she pretended otherwise. As for Rex, age began to show more plainly. His once strong body grew slower, his breaths heavier. His coat, already streaked with gray, lost some of its sheen, and the limp in his hind leg grew more pronounced. Yet his spirit never wavered. He still padded after Ethan through town, still barked with authority when sirens wailed, and still lowered his head to let Tommy's hand rest against him. The town children called him the old soldier, and townsfolk treated him with respect, offering scraps or nods of gratitude when he passed. One winter night, with snow drifting gently outside the station windows, Rex lay down by Ethan's desk. Ethan reached down to stroke his head, feeling the familiar warmth beneath his palm. "You've done enough, partner," he whispered. Rex's eyes closed, his body relaxing with a sigh. By morning, the shepherd was gone, his final rest as quiet and dignified as his service. The news spread quickly, sorrow rippling through Maple Creek. On the day of the memorial, the entire town gathered outside the police station. The flag flew at half-mast. Officers in uniform stood in solemn lines, their badges gleaming in the pale sunlight. A wooden podium had been placed in front of the steps, and Ethan stood there, his dark suit crisp, his gray eyes shining with tears he did not try to hide. Beside him, Anna offered a supportive smile, her hands clasped before her. In the crowd, Tommy stood tall, wearing his best jacket, his cap tucked under his arm. Though still young, his eyes carried the determination of a man ready to honor the vow he had made to himself. Ethan cleared his throat, his voice steady despite the ache in his chest. Rex was more than a dog. He was a partner, a protector, and a friend. He lived through pain most of us can't imagine, but he never stopped fighting for what was right. He stood with Sheriff Hayes. He stood with me. And in the end, he stood for all of us. His words carried across the crowd, filling the silence with truth. We will not forget him. As Ethan stepped back, the mayor unveiled a bronze statue on the station lawn. It was modest in size but powerful in presence. Rex, standing proud, ears alert, his bent ear faithfully recreated, his stance protective and watchful. The plaque at its base read, "Rex, the Loyal Guardian." The crowd bowed their heads. Some wept, others whispered prayers. For Ethan, it was both an ending and a beginning. He placed his hand against the cool bronze, remembering the warmth of Rex's fur, the loyalty in his amber eyes. "Rest easy, old friend," he whispered. "You've earned it." And as the wind carried the sound of the flag snapping overhead, Maple Creek stood together, its people united not just by loss, but by the gift Rex had left behind, the belief that loyalty, courage, and justice could outlast even death. In the end, Rex's story reminds us that even in the darkest valleys, loyalty and courage can shine brighter than fear. What seemed like a tragedy became a miracle, a sign that God's hand can bring justice and healing when we least expect it. Just as Rex never gave up on protecting those he loved, we too are called to hold on to faith and to believe that no pain is ever wasted in the eyes of the Lord. In our daily lives, we may face struggles that feel unbearable, but God often sends us reminders through people, through small acts of kindness, and sometimes even through a loyal dog, that miracles are real. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs hope today. Comment below and write Amen if you believe in miracles and pray for God's blessing upon everyone watching. And remember to subscribe so we can continue to bring you stories of faith, courage, and redemption.